went back to Alaska for the summer. That left us short a teacher in the little ones. And Scott volunteered to take them till the end of May when we start our new quarter in June. I don't know if I will remain in here or Scott will. If we find somebody to take that class, Scott will be back in this class again. So, but I'm gonna give it a shot, and we'll do this for at least through the month of May. I'll be teaching this class. If we're gonna be in the book of Mark this morning, if you will take and open your Bibles to Mark chapter 11. And this is, we're going to talk about when Jesus cleansed the temple or cleared the temple the second time. A lot of people that kind of read through the Bible a little bit, and they'll even get in an argument with you at times saying, well, Jesus just cleared the temple one time. But we know he had to do it twice. Because let's turn back to John right quick. You hold your place in Mark. Let's turn back to John, the second chapter. Right after he changed the water into wine, the first sign that he did for his mother at the wedding, not very long after that, we have the first account of Jesus cleansing the temple. And if you read through it, that's the very first beginning of his time on earth as he started preaching. Over about the first 3 years. That was right at the very end of it. He does it at the first, and he does it at the last. He wanted to make sure everybody understood that it was his temple. Let's go to John chapter 2, starting in verse 13. John 2, starting in verse 13. If I'm at the right place. Yes. In both times, it's right around Passover time. So that's what confuses somebody thinking it's the same event, but it's not. But both events. It says, now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers doing business. And when he had made a whip of cord, he drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' monies, and overturned their tables. And he said to them, as those that sold doves, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. That was the first time he went in. That's the first time he went as he started gathering his disciples, went up to Jerusalem, and then he found all that going on in the temple. I want to ask you a question first. Why were they even allowed to be in the temple doing that to start with? Someone have a history know the history of why that was done, or who was doing that, and who was allowed to do that?
Well, it started because you had to have a perfect, or what they considered a perfect specimen, a perfect animal, and you just couldn't bring any particular animal there. It had to be perfect on their particular standards, and because of that, it led to we'll start providing those.
Why, that's the next question. Why did they have to provide these animals for these people? I thought you were supposed to bring it yourself. They're coming from everywhere in the world, at the known world at the time. All the Jews was coming back. They had to make a pilgrimage back to, on the day of Pentecost, back to Jerusalem, right? Okay. If we're traveling from here, I don't want to take animals with me and have to care for them on this long trip. And some of it was a very long trip for lots of people. You got to feed them, you got to water them, you got to take care of them. And hopefully when you got there was no blemishes on that animal. That's what you were required to do. So those outside of the temple, and not all of them were Jews either. Okay? They had allowed them to start moving in closer and closer and closer. If there was money to be made, people are going to find a way, aren't they? Does everybody agree with that even today? If there's money to be made, people's going to find a way to do it. Has not ever changed. So, they were providing these animals. What was the problem with some of these animals, though, as we read? They had blemishes. They weren't the best of the stuff they're supposed to be. It was good enough for people thought they were just getting by good enough. Okay?
Plus, they had a special deal with the priests.
Today it's called what? Kickback?
Yeah. And so,
in business?
So, it wasn't, it really was a very, very corrupt system that was in play. Just like it is today.
Sure. Now, what would be the problem today if we set something up like that? what would happen to the cost of those animals that you were buying? A whole lot more than what they were really worth, wouldn't it? People's going to make money on it. You go buy a car. What's the markup? I've always considered two things in the world that you would have no idea how much it costs to make. And that is jewelry and furniture. Those two items, you can't hardly track down on how much it costs to make those two items in this country. You that ever been in the retail business know the markup of items that people go and put in their stores. If you don't believe it, get on a prescription card and find out how much you can get it for a whole lot cheaper.
Look how quickly your car decreases when you drive it out the driveway.
The day you drive it off the lot,
That's what I meant.
it drops because it's no longer a new car.
Well, you know, the first principle in economics is demand.
Right.
If there's
Supply and demand.
If there's demand, then the price will go up. When there is no longer demand for it, the price goes down.
So they had said all this stuff to make it easy on people, right? Or they thought they were making it, but they figured out real quick over the years, hey, if the priest will let us set up in here, we'll give him a little bit back. And they were fleecing the people again. So we all kinds of problems with that. Well, that happened right at the very first of Jesus' preaching on earth is when he started in that problem. Now, he's toward the end. He's already told his disciples that his life is coming to an end. They didn't like it, they didn't hear it, they didn't understand it, but it was going to happen. So that takes us back to the Mark. Everybody turn back to Mark, the 11th chapter. All right? And see if there's any difference. Now, a lot of people will claim that Jesus used force or violence or something like that in the temple to drive people out when he said he made a whip. What would you think?
If you didn't know the Bible, you'd think it'd be something.
Right. You think he took a big old whip or a cord or something and just started slashing people with it, right? And driving those people out. Have you ever seen a whip? You want to stay away from it?
Yes,
if it's
sir.
coming at you?
Yes, sir.
I've always considered this as when the police show force on these horses. Saw that this last year when I went to Houston to the NRA National Convention down there. And when we went in, it was pretty calm. When we came out, it was not a calm situation. It scared me a little bit. I had never been involved in almost right. But those guys had lined up on those horses. Why do they use those big old horses on riders?
They can push the people back.
They can push people, and that's a huge animal coming at you. Just the view of that. And with Christ himself using that cord or whip or whatever it was, it depends on what version you look at, him swinging that and hitting things with it, never touched a person. It never says he whipped anybody, did it? That got their attention. They started backing up and moving their stuff out. And that's what he used that for. Let's look at the account here in Mark, the 11th chapter, starting in the 15th verse. So they came to Jerusalem. Then Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. Sounds familiar. Sounds like the same account, doesn't it? All right? But then it changes. And then he would not allow anyone to carry their wares through the temple. Then he taught. This is different. Then he sat down and started teaching people. Again, that's why the whole reason he went to the temple to start with is to teach. And he said, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a den of thieves. If you go back to Isaiah, he pulls these two parts of Isaiah's verses here, Isaiah and Jeremiah. In Isaiah, he talks about the house being a house of prayer for all nations. Back in Isaiah, the 5th chapter, I think in verse 7. Oh, no, 56 verse 7, I'm sorry. And then in Jeremiah, he talks about the temple had become a den of thieves way back in Jeremiah's times. So when he said those two, made references to those Old Testament verses, they understood exactly what he was saying about the temple itself. It said the scribes and the chief priests heard and sought that they might destroy him, for they feared him because, and here's the reason why, because all the people were astonished at his teachings and even had come and went out of the city. He had come in and went out of the city. They were listening, weren't they? They were listening to him.
The religion in John, it seems pretty significant.
This is a different event. He didn't use a whip this time. He just drove them out. Now, do you think they remembered 2.5 years earlier of what he did in the same temple in Jerusalem? That he came in, plus how much more popular had he become from the very first time he did it to now. Remember, this he just entered. What did they do on his entry into Jerusalem this time? What did all the people do?
Laid leaves and things.
Palm branches in their clothing.
The huge multitude of people, they made it like a king's entry, and that's what it was supposed to be. They made it like a king's entry. They all know who he was this time. So when he said, get all that stuff out of here, and he started toward them, then they picked up and they left. They had a good memory of what happened when he first came. He didn't have the following at the first.
Yes, I never realized it was
2 separate events. Very much so. A lot of people don't. They just remember, because remember, John records things totally different. Because you have to also remember who his audience was that he was writing to, John's. So it was very significant that he also told them at the end of his ministry here on earth that he had to cleanse the temple a second time. How long did it take him to go back in? I wonder after he did it the first time. Because it talks about him going several different times, but it never talks about them causing the same problem. But we also know what the chief priest and the priest always, they had their finger in everything, didn't they? They were making their living and making a good living off of the people. The temple tax is one of them. What else did they do? Y'all remember what the priests were doing to the widows and the unfortunate people that owed debts? No, they were taking their property from them. Right. They were seizing their property from them because they couldn't pay their debts. And that would be like me and Kenny if y'all had problems. We went out and took your stuff. How would y'all feel about that? I don't think it'd go over very quick, would it?
My lawn needs mowing anyway.
But that's what the priests were doing at the time. They were taking advantage of their people. Yes, sir, Jake?
You know, Johnny, we talked a week or two ago about music in worship, musical instruments in worship. And to me, it goes back to this same thing. It's kind of like the difference in worshiping those days and worshiping now. God made it so easy. All he's asking for is you to sing and praise his name and thank the Lord. You don't need instruments, you don't need animals, you don't need anything.
Right.
You can do it.
Because what law are they living under?
That's right.
They're living under the Mosaic law, right?
And now you can do the worship service anywhere you are, you know. You don't need a whole lot of things to do it. Just whatever you have, if you normally would have, this is all you need to do
right.
the worship service. Kind of the same thing with musical instruments.
He was the one that made the sacrifice for us. Exactly. I don't know how many of y'all have ever traveled as a group. I know when several of us men go on trips to Colorado riding four-wheelers and stuff, we always take, if we know we're going to be over a Sunday, we always take the Lord's Supper and stuff with us. That makes it very easy for us to have a short devotional worship service, and there's nothing like doing that on sunrise on top of a mountain in Colorado. It's just something that's incredible about that. To read some Bible verses, to talk about God, and then to commune with Him. Now, it doesn't mean a lot of people want to use that, well, where there's a few are with together, where there's a few together, God will be with you also. That's a totally different concept, and they're totally different. The people take that way out of text, all right? So, but that's not what that means. That's a whole another study on that. So he did that and drove them out. Now, as he continues to teach, he's coming. He leaves town, comes back, leaves town, comes back, leaves town, comes back. He's not staying in Jerusalem. He doesn't want to stay there because he knows someone's after him. If Jesus had stayed there, they probably would have killed him earlier. Had somebody, they would have hired an assassin to take care of him. But he had a plan, and there's other things that Jesus needed to do to get things laid out like they're supposed to be. Before they got there, back up in verse 12, as you continue to read through this part of the book, that as they came in, there was a fig tree. And we know the event of the fig tree. If you go back to 12, he says, now the next day, this is before Jesus created the temple, They were already staying in Bethany, and they were coming there, and they were coming to the temple and going back to Bethany in the evenings to stay. So now the next day, when they had come to Bethany, come out from Bethany, he was hungry. And this talks about Christ. And seeing that there was a fig tree having leaves, he went and see if perhaps if he could find something on it. And when it came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it had not yet the season for figs. In response, Jesus had said, "Let no one eat fruit from this tree ever again." And it just passed it, you go, why is that in there? Because he's going to come back to it in just a few minutes. He's going to teach his disciples a lesson using that fig tree just a little bit. So, but also, if you remember, I think over there, like in April and May, or May and June is when they usually put on figs. But they do have buds on them for a long time. If you've ever seen a fig tree, they bud out for a long time. And there's parts of a fig tree that you can eat early. But there wasn't even a bud on this tree. And it wasn't producing fruit. What do we know about a vine that does not produce fruit? That he has already taught them.
That we're the vine and the branches.
What about the ones that don't produce fruit?
Taking them out.
The vine, what they call it, the vine dresser, the guy that takes care of them in the vineyard, he prunes them off. Yeah, how many of y'all prune trees? Raise your hand. If y'all prune y'all got stuff you prune. So, I had them before where you had to prune things off. Even roses, you have to prune the rose bushes back from time to time. Any of your shrubs, you have to prune back from time to time. There's a reason you do that, so they will produce new fruit or new branches.
With the fig trees, doesn't the fruit come first, then the leaves?
No, well, it depends on what type of fig tree you have. And I don't know exactly what they had back then. So usually
I thought in
the
theory-
buds come out first.
Right.
And then the leaves do come out, because we've had fig trees, and then they cover up with fruit. But the buds are before the leaves. Just like this spring, with all the stuff that were budding out, you saw you can pick up, that's how you tell if the tree's alive or not, if there's live buds on it. No leaves are on it yet, but then it'll leaf out, and then whatever fruit and stuff it produces comes out later.
I was saying, I used to here, but to me, he's calling that, making the point of being a hypocrite. Because looking at the tree, there should have been fruit on it, and so he's basically saying, you're putting this out there, but you're not really following up what you're saying, and he comes back around to that later on.
What does it say? It said the fig tree having leaves. It should have had something on it, something to eat that he could have gotten, whether there would be ripe fruit, but there should have been something he could eat off of that tree, and it wasn't. All right, but that's not the point he's wanting to make. He makes a comment so his apostles can hear him, and he's going to come back to that in just a few minutes, because when they leave, look what happens. And then he tells them the lesson of the fig tree after he leaves the temple going back home. So now in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from its roots. And it's totally dead now.
What verse you in?
20, verse 20. And Peter remembered saying to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed, which you cursed was withered away." And Jesus said to them, "Have faith in God." And he's just to teach them a lesson, a big lesson here that we also need to be taught. "For assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be removed,' and it will be cast into the sea, and do not doubt in your heart, but believe that those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. Therefore I say to you," and this is what he wants his disciples and all those that are following him, "whatever things you asked when you pray, believe that you will receive them and you will have them." Now, does that mean I'm going to have $1 million if I pray for $1 million?
No.
What is he talking about here? What spiritual things are we always praying for?
Hell.
It could be health, but that's usually not a spiritual thing, because we know what's going to happen to our bodies. All of us.
Slave.
It's going to die. It's going to get diseases. It's going to have problems, right? But what spiritual things is he trying to teach them here?
Faith.
Faith, hope, love, charity, all those things that we're supposed to.
Continue in.
All those things that we're supposed to continue in.
Teaching.
All right, what else? What else do we pray for spiritually? What?
To be more like Jesus.
Hope. Somebody said hope.
I said souls.
Oh, souls. We pray for souls. We've been talking about that quite a bit in the last several weeks, haven't we? Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking that, as you're saying all these things, aren't these really the fruit of the Spirit?
What are the fruit? And that's where I was headed.
And the fruit is, like on that tree, it didn't produce fruit, so these are the fruits though that we should be producing.
Right. What happens if we don't produce those fruits? What happens if we don't produce the fruits of the Spirit? Love, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. Which one did I leave out? I left out one. Joy. All right. If we don't have those or show those in our lives, we're just like that fig tree. We are useless. That tree was useless to Christ. It may have given him a shade, maybe all that they could do. And that what we do sometimes, we just do certain things to maybe help people from time to time. We show a good facade in front of us. We know who we are. We know how we act. We know how we react. But don't we all put out a personality in front of us that we want people to see? We put out a...
I do it every day. The customer service personality.
I feel for customer service people. I really do.
Well, I talk differently to my customers than I would to my husband. And he tells me all the time, don't talk to me like that. You try to portray yourself differently in the public eye than what you really are.
We all do that. But Christ is trying to tell us, don't do that. Because what does he also tell us? What are we supposed to be? Supposed to be the light of the world? What are we supposed to show people? How do we do that? How do we show Christ in our lives?
Being as much like him as we can possibly be.
Somebody should, well, he says, they will know you by your fruit. Right? Isn't that what the words are saying? They will know exactly who you are if they're around you. You got close friends. You can't hide anything from those friends. They'll even tell you, I've known you since you've been born. You can't hide that from me. That's not who you are. I know that's not who you are. And we've all been told that, I think, a time or two in our lives from close friends of ours. Don't be acting like somebody you're not. Y'all been told that before? I have too.
Well, the fruits also are what do we bring them to, but they also see us by our fruit. When they see that we are Christianity in us, are we ones they would want to follow with that? But we have to produce other
Right.
people coming to Christ too.
I admire a lot of people that are silent, that are real quiet people. If you watch what they do, they're behind the scenes most all the time. They don't want to be out front. Not everybody can be out front and be leaders, right? Not everybody can be the first person out there doing things. But there's anything that happens in our lives, there's somebody behind us, right? There's somebody that's, and I've known lots of people in my life that were incredibly quiet, and people say, well, that person's stuck up. They don't talk to nobody. Do y'all know quiet people? There is quiet people in this auditorium right now that don't talk just a whole lot. They just don't.
Didn't the good Lord say, be slow to speak?
Yes, ma'am. But if you watch them long enough, the things that they do, the more you get to know them, the things that they do, you have more, you admire them even more, because they're actually doing things. They're making actions instead of just those words. Remember, we're real bad about just saying things and not following up on the actions that you do. If you tell me, my kids, my boys always told me this. I was growing up. When they asked me if they wanted to do something, I told them, let me think about it first. They hated that because they knew they probably weren't going to get to do it, but I'm going to think about it. But if I tell you, yeah, we'll do that, and then your plans change, something happens that's out of your control, and then you have to go back on what you told your child. Your children don't forget, do they? Well, you told us we're going to do this, but we can't go. I'm sorry, something else come up, something with my job, something with health, something with somebody else that we've got to do. So I always told them, let me see, let me think about it. We'll see if we can do this. And then that way I don't have to, it's not a disappointment. When I have to come back and say, well, we're going to have to go over here and help this individual, or we've got someplace to go, or something changed in my job, I've got meetings I've got to go to now. So I don't have to tell them all these hopes. They get their hopes up, and I don't have to destroy them, which I hated doing. But I got to where I learned early in my life not to just agree to everything that my kids wanted to do, or even my wife. I do the same thing with Tammy sometimes. Can we go do this? I said, let me see, because I don't know. Let me get my calendar out. Let's see what's going to happen. I can't. And then if we don't go or something else comes up, then she kind of gets, you told me we could go. So, well, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. I should have told you the same thing. Christ is telling them here, always do the things that are spiritual that God told you to do. And he's told his disciples here, don't forget about these things. And he follows it right up with prayer when he talks about prayer. So let's look at it starting in verse 25. And he says, and whenever you whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. Now, verse 26 is in not a lot of Bibles. It depends on what Bible you have. They leave out 26 because they said part of the older Greek manuscripts didn't have this in there. Part of them did, part of them didn't. A lot of times it's in parentheses. Sometimes it's underlined. Sometimes it's made different because they're not in all the manuscripts. But in most of the ones that most of our Bibles are translated from, this verse is in there. Said, but if you do not forgive, neither will the Father of heaven forgive you your trespasses. Where does that come from? Anybody remember where Christ made that statement? What it's in? Go all the way back to the Sermon on the Mount. In the model prayer that we look at, isn't that part of that model prayer? Let's go back and look at that right quick. Go back to Matthew 6 right quick. Back up to Matthew 6. When Jesus is preaching the Sermon on the Mount at the time, as we know it, and he gives us that model prayer, 6, 9 through 13. And most of us have heard this 100 times or 1,000 times. When you get down to verse 12, it says, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. It's said a little bit different in John, though. There's a short version, in Luke. Let's turn back to Luke.
Down in 14, Johnny, it says it again.
Do what now?
Right there in 14, it says it again about.
Right. Let's go back to look at Luke 11. This is the short version of the same thing. Get over to it. Verse 2 through 4. And it's a short version of the model prayer. In verse 4 it says, and forgive our sins, for we also forgive anyone who is indebted to us. A little bit different. Y'all's version got a different word for indebted in your version. Look at it and see what yours says here.
Yes, everyone has sinned against us.
Have sinned against us.
Transgression.
How does a transgression against us? Isn't that one of the hardest things for people to do, is to forgive? It just is. Especially if someone has hurt you, or hurt your family, or done something to you. Now, some of y'all are in business that has people that have to pay you. If you have rental property, if you have investment companies, if things like that. When people don't pay their debts to you, how does that affect you as an individual? Or if someone has borrowed from you and don't pay it back. It can hurt. Right. And if you were depending upon those funds to come in for anything like that that's financial wise, it makes it very difficult on you, don't it? But he says, for those that have done something wrong to us, we have to forgive those, or God's not going to forgive us. He's told us that. Yeah, he tells us, I don't know how many times in Scripture. If we don't forgive, God's not going to forgive us. And that's one of the hardest things. And I still, to this day, have people tell me, I'm sorry, those people done me wrong, I can never forgive them. My goodness, do you have any idea what you're saying? Because what did Christ say? And what did the apostles say?
Forgive, you won't
Can't
forgive
forgive
them.
others, so you can, God won't forgive.
God will never forgive you either.
Or you hear him say, I'll forgive them, but I won't ever forget it.
Well, then you
Well,
don't forgive them.
I think mentally you can't forget. Because I can probably remember every person that ever really hurt me, but I don't hold that against them anymore. That's just something that happened.
I think when they said that mean they're gonna hold you against
Yeah, I do too. So, yes, ma'am.
Even if, you know, you might, if you don't forgive them, it's hurting you because it builds up.
How do they usually feel about it?
They don't.
They don't even think about it.
But if you forgive them, it really makes you feel a whole lot better.
Sure. Yeah, I
You
just
learn from it.
You do.
right.
Learn from it.
And if yes, sir.
I've heard it said though, that if they don't ask for your forgiveness, that you can't forgive them.
Because you don't repent.
You don't repent, and Christ won't forgive you. So that's their argument on that.
Right.
First, there has to be some kind of reconciliation, before you can forgive them.
That's,
Don't take away yours.
that's another whole study in its own, and I don't really want to go there yet. Not today, okay? That's another separate study in its own.
Christ forgive the people that came to him.
Sure he did. Well, he forgave those that even asked on the cross as he was dying.
He forgave them, but never without repentance.
Right. Without him repenting.
There's gonna have to be repentance before he can forgive them.
I think the forgiveness is for us.
Sure.
And
Again, like she said, that can eat you alive, can it? Somebody that's hurt you and you just won't let it go.
Forgiveness brings freedom, and you really want to carry that around, all the time, that way, you have that sense of, I'm free now when I forgive them.
Yep, you've heard it said that I'm carrying all this baggage behind me. I'm dragging all this stuff that I should have already forgotten, gotten over with, and didn't. And yet that is still affecting the way I deal with people, the way I talk to people, the way I think about people. And it does. Forgiveness is more for us than that person.
But when you get hurt deep enough, you hope that you don't ever hurt someone else as badly as someone has hurt you.
In that wisdom, in that part of having wisdom or learning wisdom, don't do to someone that someone did to you to hurt you. So, and that's also the golden rule, kind of, isn't it? I want to be treated as, I'm going to treat someone as I want to be treated. So, Pat, you had.
so I think all of this too is when we ask for things, and it says in some of where Christ is saying on the Father's side, ask for prayers in my name. We're not asking for these or just wealth or for anything through the Spirit that we're asking these things. And that we're not asking just to be, get this job or do this for this person. But we're asking for things that Christ wanted us through his Spirit. We ask things through the Spirit.
What is Christ trying to teach his apostles here, starting in verse 22? What is he trying to teach them?
The best way to live, where your life counts for more, when you live more for them than you do for you.
He's talking about when he prays, you got to know that prayer is powerful. And that's what he's trying to, it's powerful enough to move a mountain into the sea.
God is powerful.
God can do all things, and we a lot of, I noticed on my contribution check, so we can all do all things through God who I went blank on the rest of it. Strengthens me. He's trying to teach his apostles how powerful prayer is right here. And it's strong enough to move a mountain into the ocean. Because God can do all things. He can forgive those that trespass against us, just like we should forgive those that trespass against us. How many trespasses against him do we have? Ourselves.
Ooh, many.
Remember, our sins put Christ on that cross. And those that come after us, their sins put Christ on that cross. Those that came before us put Christ on that cross. He died for all of them. Every one of ours. If it wasn't for His love, for His ability to forgive, we wouldn't have a hope at all of going to heaven with Him one day. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, and somebody over here that said it, about putting conditions on forgiveness, whether they ask for it, whether they don't. And that may be true, I don't know. But a lot of times, some of the things that we think are real, we just think we know that's true or whatever the situation is. And then further development, further study, we find out it's not necessarily, or we might be interpreting it not correctly.
How many of this sometimes always been right? Wives, don't say anything about your husbands. Okay.
My thing is that if this is worth your soul, if being right is worth you being condemned, or if your opinion is worth so much that you're willing to sell your soul, or willing to condemn your soul over that, I guess that's one of the things. If you're willing to withhold forgiveness, and it's for whatever reason you're willing to withhold it, you're willing to withhold forgiveness, and it's worth your soul being condemned, then I guess go for it.
Yep.
But I guess
it goes back to that adage: we may win the battle but lose the war.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the same thing we get into when we try and win arguments over Bible things about people. Is it worth losing their soul that you're trying to bring them? And that's what Rod tried to tell us too. Don't get into these small arguments yet. You can learn and work through those things later, but right now, don't try and win the battle. You want to win the war for their soul. And that's where we got to go to.
But Johnny, we might think of it this way. If Jesus said it, we don't need to question it.
Yeah.
Now, I'll say this. If I'm done wrong, I can forgive a person. But it does throw up a little bit of red flag. Be cautious on your next time.
Well, God gave us a mind to be wisdom. That's part of wisdom.
Right.
You know, I get burned enough times I should not go back. Why do we teach our children? Don't touch that stove. Well, they go up there and get burnt once. Usually once or twice is all it takes. And they know that the stove is hot now. Don't go back and do the same things over and over and over.
Yeah.
And we all have those kind of problems. All right? Yes, sir.
I think it
Where in
does.
the Bible, we don't speak it in our regular language, but it tells us to be discerning.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
sometimes we wouldn't get ourselves into these situations where somebody could take advantage of us or less.
Right.
A little more.
We may get burnt once, but once is enough. We should learn from it.
I do believe that Jesus is right when he says that. If we really do some serious thinking on it, because I think if we don't forgive that person, I think it affects our lives.
And that's what a lot of them said in here. If we can't get past that ourselves, but there are times when they need to ask for our forgiveness to get back in the same relationship with us.
Yeah, that's right.
It is, because that's what God requires. He requires us to ask for His forgiveness to get back in the relationship with Him.
Yeah.
Sometimes we miss that. All right, we're going to stop there, and we're going to have a little program here in just a second. Y'all need to get a drink of water, not come right back in pretty quick. Some of the guys are going to be passing out some little brochures here.